What happens when Donald Trump interrupts Barack Obama's live town hall, only to be quieted by a single sentence that the entire nation keeps replaying? The audience didn't know how to react. It was supposed to be a calm Tuesday evening town hall in Phoenix, Arizona. Obama sat beneath the bright studio lights, his jacket open, tie slightly loosened to appear relaxed yet still professional. He was speaking about the strength of democracy when the moderator's earpiece suddenly crackled. The atmosphere instantly changed. "Mr. President," the moderator said nervously, glancing toward the camera, "we've just been told that President Trump is calling in." A wave of surprise moved through the crowd. This wasn't planned. No one expected a sitting president to interrupt his predecessor's live event, especially on national television. Behind the scenes, the control room went into chaos. Producers signaled urgently through the glass. The moderator looked shocked, as if something serious had just happened. Obama, however, remained steady. He leaned back slightly, one hand resting on the chair, the other lightly touching his chin, calm, almost amused. "Put him through," Obama said in a measured and composed tone, the same steady delivery many had missed since 2016. The large screen above the stage came alive. Trump's face appeared through a phone feed, his voice loud and direct through the speakers. "Barack, I had to call in," Trump began. "I'm watching this and it's a disgrace. A complete disgrace. You're talking about democracy, but during your administration jobs were disappearing everywhere. Under me we had the strongest economy in history. People know it. Everyone knows it. No one has ever seen anything like it." Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, while others whispered among themselves. This was no longer just a surprise. It had become a live clash between two different eras, unfolding without filters. Obama didn't respond right away. He turned slightly toward the audience, allowing the silence to settle. Then, in a calm and relaxed tone, he said, "Well, it looks like we've got company tonight." Laughter spread through the room, easing the tension briefly. But everyone knew this moment was building toward something bigger, an unscripted exchange that could go viral within seconds. Trump, sensing the attention, continued more forcefully. "People remember how bad things were before me. Terrible. Manufacturing was collapsing. China was taking advantage of us. I came in and fixed it. The numbers prove it. Without me, this country would be in serious trouble. And now you're sitting here acting like you achieved something. You didn't, Barack. People know the truth." His words were direct and forceful, aimed more at dominating than convincing. And they carried influence. After all, he was still the sitting president, leading headlines and dominating media coverage. But the audience's focus had shifted. They were no longer watching the screen, they were watching Obama. They wanted to see his reaction. Would he respond emotionally? Would he engage directly? Or would he remain composed? Obama leaned forward slightly, clasped his hands and looked straight into the camera. He didn't raise his voice or rush his words. He spoke with calm precision, like someone experienced in handling pressure and understanding the strength of patience. "Mr. President," Obama began, pausing just long enough to emphasize his words. "I believe the American people care less about who speaks the loudest, and more about who actually tells them the truth." Applause filled the room. The moderator shifted in his chair, both relieved and uncertain. The exchange was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding live in front of everyone. Trump's voice returned, louder than before. But something had already shifted. Obama's response stood out not just because of the words, but because of the delivery, calm, controlled, and confident. The contrast was clear to viewers. One voice sounded loud and agitated, the other steady and composed. At that moment, the attention belonged to Obama, but this was only the beginning. What followed would transform a political exchange into one of the most replayed live television moments in recent memory. Later that evening, inside the East Wing, the atmosphere felt tense. Staff members moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, preparing for what was coming. When the door to the First Lady's private office closed, the sharp sound made even a Secret Service agent glance over. Everyone sensed the seriousness of the situation. Melania Trump sat behind a polished mahogany desk, a glass of water untouched beside her. In front of her lay a leaked DNA report, its pages slightly bent from her tight grip. Her hands shook, not from fear but from controlled anger. For years she had maintained composure, carefully keeping her emotions out of public view. But this situation was different. This was about Barron Trump. "I will not allow them to harm my son," she said firmly, her accent clear in the quiet room. "Do you understand? I don't care what it takes." Across from her, two advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Raymond Hall, an experienced strategist, cleared his throat. "First Lady, we can handle this. Rumors and leaks happen often. What matters is controlling the narrative before." "Before what?" she interrupted sharply, striking her hand against the desk. The sound echoed. "Before every newspaper prints false stories about my family? Before my son becomes a target?" Her voice broke slightly, part anger, part concern. The room fell silent. Even Hall, who had managed many crises, struggled to respond. This situation had moved beyond politics. It had become deeply personal, about family, legacy, and identity. And those are things no official statement can easily resolve. Melania Trump stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the wall. She began pacing, her heels striking the marble floor in a steady rhythm. "I gave everything for this role," she murmured, mostly to herself. "I protected. I stayed quiet. I smiled when I wanted to speak out. And this is how they repay me." One of her aides, a young woman named Charlotte Winslow, spoke carefully. "Ma'am, we don't yet know who leaked it, but if we can trace it." "Find them," Melania interrupted sharply. "I don't care how. I want to know who betrayed me." Her voice was low but firm. The demand created a tense silence in the room. Charlotte quickly wrote notes, her hands slightly shaking before stepping out to make calls. That left Raymond Hall, who understood better than to push her in that moment. Still, it was his role to advise. "We have options," he said carefully. "We can challenge the report, call it false, connect it to political opponents, or we can stay silent and let it pass." Melania gave a short, bitter laugh. "Pass? Nothing disappears in Washington. Everything stays. They'll use this to damage him and me." For a moment, her anger softened. She appeared vulnerable, her eyes slightly wet, her hands gripping the back of the chair. But then she straightened, her composure returning like a shield. "Prepare statements," she ordered. "But nothing is released until I approve it. Not a single line leaves this office." Hall nodded, though he understood something she didn't want to accept. Secrets rarely remain hidden in Washington. The more tightly they are controlled, the faster they spread. And somewhere, someone already had copies of the report. That night, White House staff would later recall hearing glass break from the private residence, possibly a vase thrown in frustration. No one questioned it. No one needed to. Everyone understood. The First Lady had reached a breaking point. She was known for her restraint, rarely showing emotion publicly. But this situation was different. As quiet conversations spread through government offices, aides shared what they had witnessed. "She's extremely angry," one said on the phone to a colleague in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. "I've never seen her like this. Anyone expecting silence is mistaken." Those conversations became part of the story, adding fuel to the situation. It was no longer just about the DNA report, it was about her reaction, showing how deeply the issue had affected her. But anger alone could not contain a crisis, especially when others in Washington were preparing to make it public. The next morning, the mood across the Capitol felt tense. A motorcade moved quietly along Pennsylvania Avenue, not for a public event, but for a private meeting inside a law office located between downtown coffee shops. Inside, there were no flags or formal speeches. Only lawyers, crisis managers, and political strategists gathered with one goal: contain the DNA leak. At the head of the table sat Raymond Hall, Melania's most trusted advisor, alongside two attorneys from a firm known for handling political crises discreetly. On the polished table rested the folder with the leaked report. No one spoke at first. They simply looked at it as if it carried serious consequences. "We have two options," one lawyer finally said. "Discredit or distract. We can label it false, connect it to political rivals, suggest it's an attack on the First Lady. Or," Hall asked, his tone firm. "Or," the lawyer continued, adjusting his tie, "we bury it under something bigger. Another story. Another controversy. Washington moves quickly when there's something new to focus on." Hall rubbed his forehead. He knew this strategy well. Distractions could work, but timing was critical. Act too early and it appears staged. Wait too long and the situation could grow uncontrollable. And above everything was Melania herself, angry, pressured, and demanding the complete removal of the story. Back at the White House, Charlotte Winslow returned with concerning updates. She had spent hours contacting sources, following every possible lead. Some pointed to the medical field, others to a staff member with access to private records. But every lead ended the same way. Someone wanted this information released, and had hidden their tracks carefully. Meanwhile, Melania continued pacing in the residence, her phone held tightly as Hall updated her from downtown. They believe we can contain it, he said cautiously. But it will take time and resources. Time we don't have, Melania replied sharply. Half the city already knows. If Jasmine Crockett gets access to this. She stopped mid-sentence, holding back the rest. The thought of the outspoken congresswoman using the situation added to her concern. Charlotte entered the room holding her notepad. Ma'am, there's already discussion online. Small accounts for now, but people are beginning to ask questions. Melania's expression hardened. Stop it. How? Charlotte asked quietly. Call platforms. Contact editors. Speak to whoever you must. I don't care if it requires pressure or favors. No one repeats this. The room fell silent. Even in Washington, this approach was extreme. Managing a narrative is one thing, silencing it completely is another. Later that evening, Hall gathered the crisis team again. They reviewed every possible approach. Creating confusion with false leads, quiet payments to reporters, pressuring social media platforms to label the story as misinformation. Each option carried its own risk. One advisor leaned forward and spoke carefully. The real issue isn't the report itself, it's the reaction. If people see the First Lady trying too hard to hide it, they'll assume the worst. She needs to appear calm, controlled, above the situation, not angry or reactive. Hall let out a slow breath. Easier said than done, he replied. Meanwhile, news of Melania's anger spread faster than the leak itself. White House staff spoke. Journalists listened. The phrase explosive reaction began appearing in private messages between reporters, all waiting for someone willing to publish it. In Dallas, Texas, reporter Lyle Morgan sat at his desk, looking at an email from a trusted source. Attached was a scanned copy of what appeared to be the DNA report. He wasn't the only one who had received it, but he was among the few determined to verify it before publishing. He picked up the phone and called a congressional staff member he trusted. Have you heard what's happening in the East Wing? He asked. The response was brief. She's panicking. If you have something, publish it. Lyle Morgan leaned back, caught between caution and ambition. If he moved forward, the story could dominate headlines nationwide. If he delayed, someone else would likely release it first. While Morgan considered his decision, Jasmine Crockett was already monitoring the situation closely from her Dallas office. She spoke with her aides, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed forwarded emails and early reports. This isn't only about a family issue, she said calmly. It's about transparency, what is being hidden and why. Her team exchanged quick looks. They recognized that tone. Crockett had identified an opening. But before she could act, Melania Trump's team was preparing a counter-strategy that would test how much control she actually had. Crockett was not someone who avoided controversy. She had built her reputation on direct communication and confident confrontation. So when news of Barron Trump's DNA leak reached her desk, she did more than observe, she focused on it. Her staff gathered in a modest conference room in Dallas. Laptops were open, coffee cups scattered, and a whiteboard filled with names, timelines, and connections. It looked more like an investigation than a routine meeting. Jasmine stood at the front, hands on her hips, her expression focused. All right, she began, her voice steady but firm. Tell me what we actually know. Skip speculation, just the facts. Her aide, Marcus Bellamy, analytical and quick with research, brought up the first slide. The document first appeared in a secure email chain among medical staff, he explained. Someone forwarded it, but we can't confirm who. After that, it spread quickly. At least 3 journalists have copies, but none have published. Why? Jasmine asked. They're cautious, Marcus replied. If they publish, the First Lady's legal team could respond strongly. It's safer for them to stay quiet. Jasmine gave a slight, tight smile. Cautious? That's not journalism. That's protecting power. A few aides reacted quietly. They understood her tone, she was serious. Another staff member, Lena Ortiz, added, We're hearing reports that Melania has been extremely upset, raising her voice, pressuring staff. Some are calling it her most intense reaction since entering the White House. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. That's not a headline, it's a signal. If she's reacting like that, it means this situation matters more than they want it to appear. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice. And if it's that important, they'll try everything to suppress it. That means it's our responsibility to ensure it doesn't disappear. The team exchanged looks. They already understood her direction. Jasmine Crockett wasn't someone who stood back and watched. She picked up her phone and called a journalist she trusted. Congresswoman, I hear you're looking into the DNA story, the journalist said cautiously. That's right, she replied while pacing. Tell me what you know. Off the record, the journalist hesitated. I've seen the document, but I haven't published. It's too risky. Risky for who? Jasmine asked. You, your publication, or the truth? There was a pause, then a quiet sigh. The First Lady's team is already responding. They could target anyone who publishes this. Let them try, Jasmine said evenly. I'm not easily intimidated. She ended the call and turned back to her team. Here's the plan. We do not involve Barron. He's off limits. This story isn't about him. She paused briefly. It's about her, the secrecy, the response, and how far they'll go to protect an image while limiting others. Marcus nodded. So, you're preparing a statement? More than that, Jasmine replied. We're shaping the narrative. We'll focus on what happens when power hides behind closed doors. The truth doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the public. That evening, Jasmine drafted her remarks. They were brief, clear, and direct. The next morning, standing outside her Dallas office with reporters gathered around, she delivered them calmly. Secrecy is often used by those in power, she began. When information surfaces or people speak out, that's not disorder, that's democracy functioning. And when leaders try to hide the truth, the real question is, what are they trying to prevent people from knowing? Reporters leaned forward, recording every word. She never mentioned Barron or Melania directly, but her message was clear. A journalist asked, Congresswoman Crockett, are you suggesting the First Lady is hiding something? Jasmine held his gaze. I'm saying this, if the truth makes someone uncomfortable, that's their concern, not the public's. Within hours, the clip spread widely. Online discussions about secrecy and transparency increased. News channels replayed her remarks, debating whether she had crossed a line or simply raised valid concerns. Meanwhile, inside the East Wing, Melania's team worked urgently to manage the situation. Raymond Hall called an emergency meeting, showing her the video. She's being careful, but she's clearly pointing at us, he said. She's turning this into a broader issue of ethics. Melania's expression tightened. Then we respond more strongly. But Jasmine was not only speaking, she was preparing to present supporting material that would make silence difficult. That same morning, tension filled the Rayburn House office building. Cameras lined the hallways, reporters gathered, and staff moved quickly. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was scheduled to speak at a subcommittee hearing, and it was clear this would not be routine. She entered the room calmly, holding documents, her expression focused. There was no display, only purpose. Across the city, Melania's team watched from screens inside the White House communications office. Hall leaned forward, concern visible. If she addresses this directly, we'll face serious challenges, he said quietly. Melania sat still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. She had been assured Jasmine would not mention Barron by name, but she didn't need to. The hearing began with standard procedures, but the tone shifted when Jasmine took the microphone. She adjusted it slightly and looked across the room. America doesn't function on laws alone, she began calmly. It also depends on trust. And when those in power begin treating truth as optional, that trust weakens over time. Her words drew attention. Committee members shifted, reporters prepared to write. She continued, her tone becoming more firm. Time and again we see leaders expect silence and loyalty, especially when the truth becomes inconvenient. But democracy cannot work if secrecy becomes the norm. The public deserves better. A congressman interrupted. Congresswoman Crockett, today's topic is transparency in government contracts. Exactly, she replied. Transparency is the issue, whether it involves contracts, classified materials, or private reports hidden to protect political families. The room filled with quiet reactions. Everyone understood her implication. She had pointed toward the White House without naming it. Cameras zoomed in as Jasmine lifted a document, not the DNA report, but a timeline showing how quickly efforts were made to limit the story. Within 48 hours of this report circulating, she said, tapping the page, media outlets were contacted, editors were pressured, and platforms were encouraged to restrict discussion. If this report is inaccurate, why attempt to hide it so quickly? The room reacted. This was no longer about Barron, it was about influence and control. A reporter asked directly, "Are you accusing the First Lady of misusing her position to suppress information?" Jasmine responded without hesitation. "I'm saying this. Truth does not require protection if it stands on its own. If it is valid, let people see it." At the White House, Melania's hand tightened. She's using this, she said firmly. Hall tried to calm the situation. She's framing it as a transparency issue, not a family matter. If we respond aggressively, it may appear defensive. Melania shook her head. If we stay silent, it appears weak. Back at the hearing, Jasmine concluded. Her tone softened but remained clear. Families should remain protected. But when secrecy becomes a tool of power and accountability is replaced with avoidance, everyone is affected. This is not about one family, it's about every family that expects honesty from leadership. The room became active with questions and reactions. By evening, the clip was everywhere. Jasmine gathered her papers and exited quietly, leaving behind a carefully shaped narrative. She hadn't needed to present the DNA report itself. She had shifted focus to the response, and that became the story. By nightfall, her message dominated media coverage. Her line, "Truth does not need protection," appeared across major networks and online platforms. At the National Press Club, journalists discussed how quickly the story had grown. Many admitted they had avoided the DNA angle due to its sensitivity. But Jasmine had changed the framing. She hadn't exposed Barron, she had highlighted the reaction, making it publishable. Across the country, people watched and discussed. In homes and public spaces, opinions formed. If it's nothing, why such a strong reaction? One viewer questioned. Another responded, because something is being hidden. Public opinion began to shift. It was no longer about whether the report was accurate, it was about perception. And in politics, perception often carries more weight than facts. Social media accelerated the discussion. Hashtags about transparency and accountability began trending. Clips of Jasmine's speech circulated widely, often paired with past interviews of Donald Trump. Inside the communications office, Hall and Charlotte worked late. Staff appeared exhausted as Jasmine's speech continued replaying. She didn't even mention Barron, Hall said, rubbing his forehead, and still turned this into a major issue. She's presenting herself as representing the public and we appear defensive. Charlotte hesitated. We can't deny this without evidence. People are asking for clarity. Why not address it directly? At that moment, Melania entered quietly. The room fell silent. She looked at the screen. She believes she can use this, she said firmly. She thinks I'm weak. She doesn't understand. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Jasmine's office was active. Major networks requested interviews. Marcus looked up from his device. Congresswoman, you're trending nationwide. Public approval among independent voters has increased significantly. Jasmine leaned back thoughtfully. That's positive, but we keep this about principle, not speculation. The moment this becomes about Barron, we lose credibility. Lena nodded. So what's next? Another statement? Media appearances? Not yet, Jasmine said. Let them wait. The longer they anticipate a response, the more control we maintain. But when we speak again, it must reach the entire country. Across the nation, discussions continued, in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. Some expressed concern about involving children in political debates. Others focused on the issue of transparency. But many agreed that Jasmine had addressed a broader national concern. At the White House, Hall spoke clearly. If we confront her directly, we support her argument. If we stay silent, she controls the narrative. We need another approach. Melania looked at him steadily. Then create one. Outside, media coverage continued without slowing. Jasmine had influenced the conversation, and the country was paying attention. But the First Lady was not stepping back. She was preparing her response. By the third day, her silence itself became news. Networks questioned why she had not responded, especially given her usual composure. Each hour added pressure. Inside the East Wing, her team gathered again. Curtains were drawn and tension filled the room. Hall stood reviewing notes while Charlotte organized press coverage. Melania entered last, wearing a light-colored suit, her expression controlled. Explain the plan, she said. Hall spoke carefully. We respond, but strategically. You appear first as a mother, then as First Lady. We position Crockett as reckless, willing to involve families in politics. If we focus on decency, we gain support. Charlotte added. We've prepared a brief, controlled statement. It avoids naming Crockett directly, but emphasizes that children should remain off limits. Melania reviewed it, then set it aside. Not sufficient. Hall hesitated. If we respond too strongly, it could have negative consequences. Crockett currently has public support. A stronger response may appear defensive. Melania leaned forward slightly. I'm not hiding. I'm protecting. There is a difference. She paused. She presents me as desperate. I will show strength. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the tone. When Melania Trump made a decision, it was final. That afternoon, a camera crew arrived quietly at the White House. This was not a celebration or a standard media appearance. It was her response. Seated near a window with natural light, she looked directly into the camera. I have always believed that children should remain off limits, she said in a steady tone. What I'm seeing now is unacceptable. Individuals in positions of power are using rumors to target my family. My son deserves privacy, not public attention. I will always protect him. The recording lasted less than 2 minutes, but it quickly dominated the news cycle. Supporters described it as strong and effective. Critics argued that it avoided addressing the core issue. In Dallas, Jasmine Crockett's team watched the clip together. Marcus spoke first. She's reinforcing the family argument. It's a smart move. It makes criticism more difficult. Jasmine crossed her arms. Possibly, she said, but public sympathy doesn't remove concerns about a cover-up. That remains our focus. The next morning, Melania's response expanded further. Supportive media outlets began amplifying her message, and the political situation moved into its next stage.